were a good chunk of Sesame Street games on the Atari 2600, collectively known as the Children's Computer Workshop series. Some were finished, and some were unreleased or incomplete prototypes. I'm going to take a quick glance at each one. They all used the Kids controller, which is a 12-button keyboard that used overlays depending on which game you played. There were only 3 games aside from the Sesame Street series that used this controller, and they were all prototypes or unreleased. So only Sesame Street games actually had this thing. Big Bird's Egg Catch was released in 1983. You play as Big Bird, naturally, and the object is to catch eggs that drop from chutes as they're being laid from the hens above with the nest that rests upon Big Bird's head. The overlay simply gives you an option for left and right, as all you'll need to do is walk horizontally. In the easier modes, the chutes are a vertical straight shot down, and pressing left and right will move Big Bird directly to the other chute. But then the patterns start to get a little more complicated. They'll cross paths and even be invisible for a short time, and change patterns between each egg laid. After the tutorial variations, you'll have to manually center Big Bird under the chutes. The eggs will pick up speed, and in some cases will be invisible until it falls out of the chute. You'll have to watch for the hen's egg-laying animation and follow the chute's pattern down. After each round, Big Bird heads out of the hen house to count the eggs, and then you move on to the next one. You'll start out with 5 lives, or 5 allowed misses, I guess you could say. You can add an extra life by catching the golden egg, which shows up in the later levels, once per stage, and is worth 5 points as opposed to just the 1 that regular eggs stand for. There's not much in terms of education. I mean, there is some counting going on, but once you get into the high numbers, your child probably isn't going to be able to keep up with it anyway, as the speed of the counting increases as the numbers ascend. But there is some early motor skill and hand-eye coordination practice going on. Plus, above all, it'll be fun for them, and they'll enjoy seeing a pretty good depiction of Big Bird for 2600 standards. Cookie Monster Munch, which also came out in 1983, is a scavenger hunt maze game. The overlay gives you up, down, left, and right movements, as well as an action button to pick up cookies. The object is to simply move Cookie Monster around a simple maze, or garden as the manual says, pick up the scattered cookies, and bring them back to the cookie jar. There's no time limit in the early stages, essentially making this a practice or tutorial for the middle levels that are timed. You can only carry 1 at a time, so you'll have to determine the quickest path to each cookie. Later on, the mazes are invisible, with the paths flickering momentarily each time you pick up a cookie to give you a hint as to what the maze looks like. There's also a 2-player alternating mode, as well as a Cookie Kid mode, where you pick up cookies with the kid, while Cookie Monster hops the fence from above whenever you have a cookie in possession and wanders around the maze. And if he stumbles upon a cookie, he'll eat it, taking a potential point off your score. Similar to Egg Catch, you'll get a count of the cookies you've collected as Cookie Monster eats them, increasing the speed as the count progresses, with his eyes rolling in pure ecstasy of a sugar high. Like in Egg Catch, the counting speeds up as the numbers increase, but it never gets to the insane levels of Big Bird's counting. The maze search is a good early problem-solving exercise for the little ones, and they should enjoy Cookie Monster's eating sequence. His sprite and animations are nicely done. Alpha Beam with Ernie, also released in '83, is a letter match game that takes place in outer space. The overlay gives you up, down, left, and right movements. You'll use a shuttle to grab fuel, which is represented by the letters that float around, and drop them into Ernie's ship, which is running out of gas. You have to drop the fuel into the correct bay based on the matching letter, and once you get all 4, Ernie's ship arrives home. He gets beamed down and waves at you. The early stages are basic tutorials, as the arrows will automatically center the shuttle under the fuel drums and bays with each press of the button, and all the letters are the same. Later on, you'll have to center the shuttle yourself, and they start mixing the letters up by order, as well as uppercase and lowercase letters. In the later levels, the letters on the rocket won't even be displayed, and it's up to you to place them in alphabetical order. There are 2-player cooperative modes where one player grabs the uppercase letters and the other grabs the lowercase letters. Then there's a time game and a variation where the letters in the sky don't all match the letters on the ship. You have to shuffle through the alphabet by grabbing one, which will replace it with the next letter in the alphabet sequence. There's also a custom option mode where you can spell your own 4-letter words for others to try. Just try not to teach your children some of the more colorful 4-letter words. So far, this game has more educational value than the previous 2, But the recognizable Sesame Street character doesn't show up during gameplay like the others do, only in the cutscene between levels, and even then Ernie's sprite is small. Oscar's Trash Race, released in 1984, is basically a number matching game. The overlay has up, down, left, and right movements, as well as a jump button, and 3 trash cans. Each race starts off with a dump truck that dumps out some trash on the ground. By pressing the appropriate trash can on the overlay, you pick the trash can with the corresponding number that's displayed that matches the number of pieces of trash on the ground. Then you move your grouch down, grab the trash, and bring it back to the starting line. After several rounds of this, depending on the level, the race is over, and you'll count the pieces of trash with Oscar in between, much like in Big Bird and Cookie Monster games. In the early practice tutorial, you don't even have to pick a number, as there's only one numbered can. The other variations allow a 2-player alternating mode, as well as an increased amount of trash, mud puddles that you'll have to jump over or you'll get stuck in them, increased speed, and time limit races to add challenge. There's also a rainy day mode where it will sporadically rain at some point during the race and the mud puddles turn blue and award you with additional points for jumping over them. It isn't quite as three-dimensional as Alpha Beam, and you don't get to see any Sesame Street characters during gameplay outside of the legs of the non-Oscar monsters, but the depiction of Oscar during the cutscene is well done, and it's a generally fun game, for preschool standards of course. Grover's Music Maker was never completed, but a prototype does exist for download. You select a song by picking one of the letters of the alphabet, each of them representing a song, kind of like a jukebox. And from there, you can listen to the song as Grover dances, although I use that term loosely. Look at him. Pressing the button seems to trigger the notes, so I guess the idea behind this was to teach children rhythm and timing, as well as provide them with some music exposure. There's also a feature that lets you create your own music by pressing various buttons, but are you really expecting anyone at this game's age level to come up with the next Moonlight Sonata? This feature is really just an extra toy to play with, much like how preschoolers will usually push a bunch of random keys on a toy keyboard. The game was unfinished, so there may have been more to it planned out. There certainly were a few songs missing, as the alphabet maxes out once you get to T. Interestingly enough, Grover was actually going to be the lead part in the Egg Catch game. That's right, it was Grover's Egg Catch. Thankfully, someone pulled the plug on that one after realizing that Big Bird was a much better fit. You'd think they actually designed the whole Egg Catch concept around Big Bird, but I guess that wasn't the case. Finally, there was a planned game for the Count, called Count's Castle, but it was never finished, and no prototype has surfaced as of yet. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that it had something to do with counting, but I don't know, maybe I'm grasping at straws here. These games may not be incredibly educational, but no video game should be. If games are front-loaded with educational value and short-changed with the entertainment value, then it's effectively no longer a game. Of course, these games aren't the most challenging in the world, but the target audience is preschoolers. I only played the Big Bird and Cookie Monster games when I was a kid, and even then I had already been playing enough games to where this was too easy for me. But there are at least a few degrees of difficulty for each game, so they're not just two-dimensional throwaways. If you want to introduce your preschoolers to video games, then these games are not bad options for them. Of course, at this point, there are a million games on consoles and tablets and computers for this target audience that are superior in every way. I mean, these games are not masterpieces by any stretch of the imagination, but kids should still be able to get some enjoyment out of these. Except Grover's Music Maker. Keep them away from that one for their sake and yours.